So I'm Alan Dow, I'm the director of the Center for Interprofessional Education here, and we're very excited today to have this program. It's a collaboration between us here at VCU and Donate Life Virginia. And with us today is Hillary Zarda, who's the executive director, who's going to talk for just a second about Donate Life Virginia.
Thank you so much. First of all, Alan just gave me a promotion. I'm the administrator at Donate Life Virginia, but thank you. I appreciate that. And we're so thrilled that you guys could make the time to join us today. We are really excited to welcome Joey Gase to come share his story today and to talk a little bit about organ, eye, and tissue donation. Donate Life Virginia is the agency charged by the state of Virginia to run the state donor registry and to educate across the Commonwealth about organ, eye, and tissue donation. So thank you so much. I'll be talking to you a little bit later. I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Dow. Thank you.
Thank you, Hillary. And so without further ado, we have a program of several speakers today to talk about organ, eye, and tissue donation from several different perspectives. But certainly the star of the day is Joey Gase. Joey is a NASCAR driver who is sort of a rising star in the ranks of NASCAR. He's ranked 20th. I saw in the series that he's in. And it's actually a very exciting time for him because he's about to start in his first cup race on the highest series in NASCAR next weekend in Chicago. So it's actually very exciting to have him here with such great things that's going on with his career. But he's got a very personal connection to what we're going to be talking about today, and I wanted to invite him up to sort of tell his story. So Joey, why don't you maybe start sort of at the beginning of your story about how you first became involved with organ donation.
Okay. Well, my mom passed away in April of 2011 of a sudden brain aneurysm. And at that time, I personally didn't know anything at all about organ, eye, and tissue donation. Besides, when you go to the DMV, it's just a quick yes or no question. And they pronounced my mom brain dead at the hospital. And she was a very loving and helpful person, and she ate right all the time, worked out all the time, was a very, very healthy person. And brain aneurysms is something that you can't really predict or prevent. They just kind of happen, and depending on how bad they are, there's not really a lot the doctors can do to help either. And from the aneurysm, unfortunately, there's too much pressure on my mom's brain. And when the doctor told us this, they asked us if she wanted to be an organ donor. And we didn't know for absolutely sure because her driver's license was left at home. And we never really talked about this before. And she was only 44 years old, and none of us ever expected anything like this to ever happen. And but we knew my mom. She loved helping people, and she wanted to donate blood, but she never could, because she was actually so short and so tiny, she didn't weigh enough to be able to do so. So we said yes, and I just turned 18 at the time, and my mom was not married. And legally, I was the one who had to make the final decision. And later we found out that my mom was able to help save and improve the lives of 66 people. And in 2012, I wanted to do something to not only honor my mom, but also raise awareness for donation. And I called up our local PO Iowa Donor Network to see if they would want to do something for my nationwide race at Iowa Speedway. And they were more than willing to help. And I was actually able to meet one of my mom's kidney recipients. And ESPN was able to capture it live. And when me and my sister met my mom's kidney recipient, it was amazing. Being able to see that, knowing that my mom was living on through him, and that if it wasn't for my mom, he most likely wouldn't be here today. And seeing how thankful he was, but not only him, his entire family. So the 66 people my mom helped, it didn't only help them, it helped their entire family.
Well, and one of the things, the people, a lot of them that are in the audience today are healthcare providers and are involved in taking care of patients, both that are donors and recipients. And I wonder if you could maybe tell us about your experience at the hospital that night, and what was it like?
I was awake for 48 hours, which I know in your guys' field is no big deal. But I wasn't quite used to that. And the last thing you want to think about is your mom or any of your loved ones not going to be able to make it. When you're at a hospital or you're talking with doctors, you're expecting them to be able to fix the problem no matter what it is. And when they say there's nothing more they can do, that's the last thing you want to hear. And when they ask you if they would like to be an organ-eye tissue donor, the first thing you think is like, well, what if there is something else and she can come out of it? But luckily for us, my uncle was actually an ER doctor, my aunt was a nurse, so they were able to talk us through everything and let us know what was actually happening. And one thing that I didn't like a whole lot that I saw was that when they're doing tests on my mom, they hit a reflex on her, which automatically raises up her feet. And as a family member, when I saw that, it automatically gives you hope that she's going to be okay. But my uncle was able to talk me through that and make us understand that. And so as a family, we decided she would want to be a donor. And all the nursing staff was really, really nice to us. When there was a shift change, one nurse would come find us, even if we weren't in the room, and let us know that they were leaving, and who the next nurse was going to be. And that really meant a lot to us, knowing that they truly care and they feel for us.
We have a couple pictures here, I think, of your mom, and then of your mom with you, and I guess that's your sister, is that right?
Yeah.
When you were in the hospital, it sounds like you had your aunt and your uncle were around. Was there did you have a lot of family there? I can imagine everyone sort of came to the bedside.
Yeah, my mom's side of the family is very large, and almost everyone is able to be there. And there was probably a group about 25 of us there, and we all huddled together and we did what we knew was right, and we got through it. And like I said, I knew it was going to help people, but I didn't know how many people it was really going to help and how big of an impact it was going to make in people's lives. And now after that, learning as much as I had about donation and knowing that when I first started this about 2 years ago, there's only 120,000 people on the wait list, and now it's over 130,000. So the wait list is growing instead of shrinking, and I think we need to change that and make that list shrink. And one of the scariest things, I think, why people aren't registered donors is because they don't know all the facts and the information about it. And I think we need to do a better job about informing them and not, because when you go to a DMV, the last thing, it's usually there for over an hour, you're waiting in line, and when you get up there, they start asking you questions, and you just start saying yes or no as quickly as you can so you can get out of there. And we need to make those people realize how big of a decision they're making. And I can honestly say, when I was 18, I didn't even know if I was a registered donor or not. I had to actually physically look at my driver's license and see. And we need to change that and let people know and make sure they know if they're a donor and let their families know. And even if they're not, to let them know so everyone can make the right decision.
So you've really dedicated a lot of your career towards raising awareness about organ donation. We have a couple shots here. And Charles, maybe we can turn the lights down a little bit just so everyone can see of your race car. Tell us about what we can see here. I think we have the picture from this weekend over there on the right.
Yeah, all the pictures on the left were from the spring race in the Donate Life Virginia car. And the picture on the right is actually the car that will be raced this weekend and the donor we will be honoring. And when we honor donors, it's amazing. It's amazing for me and them because it's not every day you meet someone that's kind of had to go through the same thing you had to go through. And it's like you have your own little family. And it's also great from the standpoint that when the media or anyone, a fan, sees a picture on the car, they're going to stop and ask and say, why is that picture on the car? Make them think. They'll maybe visit the website because not everyone knows what Donate Life is. And when they see the picture, they're going to look into it and ask questions. And then if they ask you, you get to tell them his story and your story and tell them why donation is so important.
You have an audience here of some people who have received organs or either healthcare providers or healthcare students. What would you like to see the healthcare providers and the people that are soon going to be healthcare providers do to sort of increase awareness around organ donation? What could we be doing better as healthcare providers?
First of all, I would just encourage all of them to really look into all the facts. I know not everyone knows all the facts, and when we're at a promotional booth and maybe a registered nurse or someone comes up to us, some of them are actually not for donation, which is actually really surprising to me. And just ask them to look into the facts and talk to people like me and recipients and other donor families and let them know how important it really is. And there's not too many donor families out there I know that I hear them say, I wish we didn't do this. Because it's also a great healing process for us, and knowing that your loved one's still living out there and that their legacy is never going to end.
So what I want to do now is bring up Alma Hassel and Debbie Hutt. And as they're coming up, I'll briefly introduce them. So Alma in the white blouse here, sit in the middle. She's a chaplain here at VCU, part of the faculty of the School of Allied Health Professions. She carries the title of the Family Communication Coordinator, which means she's involved in speaking with families around that conversation about donating organs. And then next to her is Debbie Hutt. Debbie is the manager of Donor Family Services at LifeNet Health. And LifeNet is one of the organizations that comes into the hospital to speak with families and work with healthcare providers around the decision to donate organs. You guys, I think, heard a lot of Joey's story about having a large family of 25 sort of at the bedside trying to make these really difficult decisions. Maybe, Alma, why don't you start? Tell us about sort of your perspective on how chaplaincy fits into those kind of conversations.
Thank you, Joey, for sharing your story. And I don't know if when you and your family was going through that, if there was a chaplain presence, but here at our MCV, we have what's called the Family Communication Coordinators, and we're chaplains who work with donor families or potential donor families from the very beginning. Once a patient comes into the hospital, the patient, the chaplain gets paged, and we're called on to be advocates for families. The one beautiful thing that I heard in your story, amongst so many, Joey, is that you had some physicians in your family who was able to really break it down to help you to understand what was going on, because at a time of such a crisis, it's hard to hear a lot of the jargon that's going on and to see all the commotion that's going on in the room. It can be a very confusing, scary, frightening time for families. So what we do here is we help to establish relationships early on, relationships with the medical team. LifeNet is right here. When LifeNet comes in, chaplains there as well. So we get to work together, but it's not until such a time that LifeNet actually comes forth, because we want families to feel like that they are getting the best possible care that they can, and that the doctors are doing everything that they can to maybe bring out a better outcome. So we work really hard on establishing relationships. Also, what we do is we seek clarification of the processes that's going on. Again, families don't know. They see a lot of machines, they hear a lot of things, they see a lot of busyness, and so families will be standing around, what's going on, what's going on, what's going on? And so when that question comes up, we will help the medical team to stop for a moment, just for a moment, to speak to the family, to answer the questions in real time, as opposed to trying to wait for the appropriate time. So we will ask, this question is coming up. We don't try to answer the questions, because we're there to provide that spiritual and emotional support. That's what chaplains do. So we are working really hard to be that advocate, to make sure that the family is understanding what's going on. We journey with families to be sure that their needs are taken care of. A lot of times phone calls are made when an incident happens and families have to drop what they're doing and get to the hospital immediately. So there might be some needs that are there and that need to be taken care of. So we will contact social workers. We'll do whatever it is. And sometimes there are those additional spiritual needs that are present, and maybe a priest might be needed or something like that, and we don't have one on staff. We will contact some faith tradition that might be important to them. Also, we will sit with families through the consent process as comforters. That's the hardest thing. And then as a young man, to have to make that kind of decision, I'm thankful, that so far in my family that has not had to happen, because that is hard for a young person to have to sit there and go through the whole consent process, because it's long, it's tedious, answering questions, tears, all of these different emotions are rising up. So as chaplains, as FCCs, family communication coordinators, we will sit there and comfort the family. We will also participate in team huddles to be sure that everyone is on the same page, because the last thing you want presented is confusion. Because if the team doesn't look like they, from the family's perspective, that they know what they're doing, we want to be sure that in these huddles, everyone is on the same page and that conflicting information is not coming to the families. We help LifeNet to identify what would be the best time to make the approach. There really never is a best time, but there has to be a time when the approach, is made. So LifeNet and the FCCs, there are several of us. We will huddle together with other appropriate people to decide when, after the doctor breaks the news and says there isn't anything else that we can do, there's this decoupling. It's not, that donation process for us here at MCV is not going to come up right away, because there has to be this time where the family can sit and come up with more questions, to cry, to grieve, whatever, before they can move on to the next step to even make that decision. In cases where there are situations that's a death after a cardiac death where the heart dies, we will walk with the family to the OR for the recovery of the organs, all the way as the families say their goodbyes. So we are there in the trenches with the families and with the staff, because it's a hard time for everyone. And I think that pretty much outlines what it is that we do. And then there's all the other little things there that's not identified.
So Debbie, do you want to talk about how, I'm going to mention LifeNet, but maybe how you fit in with chaplaincy, working with families?
Absolutely. Not every hospital has an FCC program. In fact, there are only 2 in the state of Virginia. LifeNet serves only the state of Virginia, so I can only speak for us. But here and Centera Norfolk General are the 2 that use FCC chaplains. Every other hospital either has a regular chaplain or no chaplain present. And so at that point, LifeNet truly has to adopt a lot of hats. My heart broke for you. It sounds like there was a lot going on for you, and all I could think was, please tell me there was someone there sitting with you answering questions. Please tell me that. Because it doesn't matter whether you've got 25 people sitting there, even with medically knowledgeable people. It is your mom. It was a tough situation. Nobody should be in that situation. And then somebody has to come and talk about the one thing you don't want to talk about. And I had one dear, dear woman who said, can we talk about this next week? And I understood. I mean, you understand. I thought he's like, yep, that's right. Next week sounds good. But unfortunately, donation is a very time-sensitive thing, and families do understand. And yes, that paperwork process can seem like it takes forever, but it's also the part where healing starts, because those stories come out and more questions come out, and someone is there the whole time. But with LifeNet, we do come on when triggers are met and the hospital calls, and we work very closely with chaplains, with nurses, with doctors, and don't ever get near the family until it is very clear that the family understands where this is going. I personally would be horrified if anyone went up to my 2 guys who were your age and said, hey, we need to talk about something, when they were not ready for it. So LifeNet is very committed to working with the medical teams in the best interest of the family. I'm very fortunate now at this point where I was working alongside the chaplains in the approach and through the process up until recovery, I now get to work with families afterwards. And so I'm in the aftercare program, and I get to stay in touch with donor families and hear how the healing is going on. We've got a terrific aftercare program that lasts 18 months, but for most families it lasts longer. We're in touch, we let them know about recipients, we let them know any information we get from recipient families. We facilitate meetings if both parties want them. We host in celebration and remembrance events and the tree lighting ceremonies. Here in Richmond, the UNOS tree lighting event corresponds nicely with LifeNet. But in Virginia Beach, we have a separate one, and then we have one also in Roanoke, because we don't want any of our families to feel like, well, it's happening, across the state, I can't be there. No, we're going to be there for you. So it is really an honor to hear your story and to be here, and thank you.
Well, thank you. And that's one thing I forgot to mention was that Iowa Donor Network and all the OPOs, I'm sure, it's not just when you leave the hospital, it's done. They keep you up with all the information. They tell you everything they can, what country or maybe what state the organs or the tissues went to. Like for my mom, a lot of her tissues actually went to the Philippines. She was really tiny and short, and a lot of people in the Philippines are tiny and short. So that's where a lot of her tissues went. And we've gotten 2 letters, and we got to meet one of my mom's recipients, and it's amazing. And it's really hard can be really hard for the families on both sides, the recipients or even the donor families, to write back. And they say it can take a really long time. Some people, they don't get a letter until 10 years after. But from talking to recipients, I hear it can be really hard because they're so thankful for their gift. They don't know how to put it to words, and it'll be different if it's a husband or a wife or who they're writing to. So it can be difficult.
I know for donor families, when a child is involved, one of the very first questions they ask after they consent for donation is, can I meet the recipient? And if the heart is in play, it is even more heartwarming and a more hopeful situation that in the face of this tragedy, something else can happen. So many times I hear from from donor families, I know that, like you said, 66, is that, 66 families were touched, but the first one was ours.
Well, this is obviously very heavy stuff, but I think it's important to think about sort of the people that benefit. And so who I want to bring up now is Daryl Hurlinger. And as Daryl comes up, we'll just talk for a second and tell his story. So Daryl, maybe talk about when you first found out you had something wrong with you.
In my particular case, I found out during a high school blood drive. I donated blood. I had never done it before. This was 1990, and my donation came back as I had non-hepatitis A, non-hepatitis A, B. C wasn't named yet, so that was the first time I knew I had something wrong.
And when did they figure out that it was actually hepatitis C that you had? How many years after that did it take?
They figured it out, fairly quickly, maybe a year later, and I had started the first interferon treatment. That's all that was available at the time, and I had gone through the treatment, and I had relapsed afterwards, and that was pretty typical. It was less than a 50% chance of clearing the virus, so I had the typical result.
And when did they trace your hepatitis C to?
In my case, I was a premature baby, born in 1971. I had stayed for many months in the hospital, had many blood transfusions, so that's where we think everything started. Had never done drugs or anything in my life, so that's the best that the doctors could figure out, where it came from.
And then it sounds like you had done fairly well with having hepatitis C for 35 years or more. When did you start to really feel sick with it?
I had really lived with it up until 2009, and I had been through 3 different treatments of the interferon. I had done interferon ribavirin, and then interferon peg ribavirin. All 3 treatments had the same result. But 2009, I kind of described to people as a light switch being turned on, because the disease really attacked my liver and really went downhill quickly.
And so, tell us about when you began to sort of approach transplant and when that actually happened.
As my liver was failing, in 2009, the doctors really, told me that we needed to start considering that, because as my scores started getting worse, that's what we were looking at doing. So I had started to go through the process of being evaluated and going through all the different testing and everything, for the transplant.
And when did you actually get your transplant?
In November of 2010.
And how did things go after transplant?
The experience for me, really after being so sick, right initially after transplant, I described to people as it was I felt like I was reborn, because you don't remember how it feels to feel good again. And so that was pretty amazing, like right after the surgery. It was, a lot of ups and downs, because you have to, you come out of the hospital with lots of medication, and you've really got to take care of yourself well, work with your doctors closely, and describe, what's happening.
And tell us about sort of 6 months after the transplant, sort of what happened.
Really that's when you start to come off the medicines, and you are able to, exercise more, and really they don't want you to do anything strenuous until a year after. But for me, it was, I felt like I owed it to the families, the donor families, to take, really good care of myself, and so that was always in the back of my mind.
But you developed a significant complication, so tell us about that.
Yeah, with in my instance, I've actually had 2 transplants. I developed the medications that you take for a transplant are very difficult on your kidneys. In my case, it started to hurt my kidneys. So at about a year after my liver transplant, I needed to have a kidney transplant.
So when did you get your kidney transplant?
I got my kidney transplant last June.
Last June. So you were on dialysis for how long?
About 2.5 years.
About 2.5 years. Yeah. So part of what we wanted to do in this panel was to provide some perspective of sort of from the donor family to the healthcare providers to the recipient. You have a chance to sort of think about sort of this continuum that exists up here between the people on the stage. What I'd like to do now is give people in the audience a chance to ask any questions that you guys might have to ask of any of the 4 people up here. Go ahead.
My question's for Joey. I was just curious, among your fellow drivers, do you know if many of them are organ donors? And if not, do you talk to them about the benefits?
I think a lot of them are. It's pretty cool. We behind the haulers, we have all the Donate Life wristbands. People can just take them as they go by, and a lot of drivers and other crew members also take them. And there's a lot of crew members out there that actually are connected to donation, and they'll come up to me and talk to me about it. And it's cool when you're walking around in your Donate Life suit. You don't know who. Just by looking at someone, you normally can't tell if they're connected donation or if they're a recipient or anything like that. And all the time you have people grab you and they'll tell you their story. And it's really cool to be able to see that. And we'll I'll get messages on Facebook or through Twitter, and sometimes even phone calls, people telling me that the reason they're donors is because of my mom's story, or because of one of the donor stories that are on my car. And it's really cool knowing that we're able to make an impact that way.
There's a question way in the back.
I just want to know about the success rate of a person and your mental state of mind. Like if you're under a lot of pressure, before surgery, does that play a part on whether your transplant is going to be successful or not?
Possibly. I mean, I was under a lot of stress, just trying to continue to work to keep health insurance. But I think the biggest thing is you've really got to be determined to fight. And I think if you go into it looking at it that way and just realizing that you've got to work closely with the doctor and the care providers, if you have that commitment, you'll do well.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not a transplant surgeon. I'm an internal medicine doc, but one of the unfortunate things about the shortage of organs is that we only give to the people that are the sickest, because we don't have enough organs for the people that are a little bit less sick, and so you have to end up being very sick often. People will get organs of the ones that are not things that are easily replaceable, like hearts, for example.
Like he said, it's not, there's a point in between. There is a point where you can be too sick and not get a transplant also. So it's funny, I met a boy in Watkins Glen who was a big NASCAR fan, and he was waiting for a kidney. And he was actually too sick to get a transplant, so they actually had to get him better to get a transplant. So it also works both ways. It's kind of funny, I guess you can say, how it works sometimes.
I don't know if Oliver, Debbie, if you guys have experiences with sort of having this kind of, Alma, maybe you may be better prepared to answer that question about working with families that are waiting for transplants. I don't know if in your chaplaincy practice, if you at times get called with those kinds of issues.
The answer is no, not necessarily so. But what I have, and this has been pretty much a unique experience since working as an FCC, is working in the hospital and being on both ends, being present for the trauma team alert to come in, LifeNet gets involved, and so I'm working there, and then the donors in the hospital going through the whole processes, and the alert goes out for one to come in to receive, and so working with families that way. So that's a rather precarious position to be put in as a chaplain, because you're looking at life and death, both staring you in the face, one family celebrating and another one grieving. That is really difficult, but actually someone waiting, no, I have not, and we don't really get that but so much.
Carol, did you have to go through any dry runs? I think a lot of times people don't know about that, maybe that you're waiting and you get a call and you think you have a match, and then you get to the hospital and get prepped, and for whatever reason it doesn't work.
I mean, fortunately for me, I didn't have that happen. The first call I got, everything worked out okay. But I do know of other patients where that had happened to them. So, I was just lucky that, when I got the call, that it was the right one.
I want to speak to kind of another experience with the Donating for Life. My husband was a donator, and unfortunately he had dropped dead after exercise, and so they had called me from the coroner's office to talk, well, actually they didn't call from the coroner's office, the folks from Donating for Life called me, and since my husband was registered and they needed to ask me those long questions, I could sympathize with what you went through. And it is a difficult time, just to, remember his life and answer those questions at a time when you really don't want to talk about it. But something that I have been involved with as a follow-up, that's one of the services that is provided, is being a grief companion. And so some folks that need somebody just to walk along and listen. It's not what you do as a grief counselor. I'm not qualified to be that. But I can talk with someone and let them just share what they're going through at that difficult year after.
Thank you for doing that. Oftentimes our society deals with grief and people who are grieving as if they're going through an illness and they need to get over it. And so our grief companions are a set of ears and a heart that just reminds them that this is not a condition. It is just a life process that you go through. Thank you.
How much of a need is there statistics-wise in this area? He talked about his mother, most of her went to the Philippines. But what are we looking at here in just central Virginia?
Are you talking tissue or organs? Because the only thing that can go outside the United States are tissue donations. Organs have to stay, I won't say within the United States because I have had a heart go to Canada, but they have to stay more local because of time constraints. Each organ has a specified amount of time that it can be not working, and so you have to factor in from the time of cross-clamp to transport to the time that you can put the organ back in the recipient. That amount of time dictates how far you can go. But with tissue, that can go outside of the United States.
If I could just add to that.
Sure.
You asked specifically about. Thank you. Virginia. Right now, Joey mentioned there are over 120,000 people waiting across the country. In Virginia, there are 3,200 people waiting for a life-saving organ transplant.
In the back.
I wanted to touch on one of the questions about the dry run, and it also touches about being stressful. Two questions that we already heard. I'm a recipient 3 days ago. It's been my heart day, 4 years of receiving a heart. It was a very stressful process, very long stressful process for me, my family, friends. I had 3 dry runs, and I never got down to the OR for them to tell me no, it didn't match. But if out of everything, that was probably one of the stressful things, because after you wait in the room or being in the house, living in the hospital for months at a time, and you finally hear that you possibly have a match, they wake you up out your sleep or whatever you're doing at the time, and you probably have to wait, stop eating for a day or a couple hours, and you're like, okay, this is my time, I'm ready for it. And then from the last second stage where it didn't match, that will put a lot of stress on anybody. The most important part on the recipient end is his corner. I tell everyone that I know that's going through something, if you have a strong support system, family, friends, team, you can get through it. I was in the military. I played sports. I was always active. I was a warrior. So my mindset was, I'm good. You know, I was young. I was diagnosed with conjunctive heart failure at 21. I'll be 29 in 2 weeks. I'll be 29 next Saturday. Right? No, it took 4 years. I was 21. This one I went through for about 3 years. Going back arguing with me, but these two people right here was one of the most important people in my life at that time. My nurses, they always said that I was hard-headed, I was mean. But at the same time, I'm not gonna say I had a reason to, but if you go through something like that, it will change your perspective of things. It will mature you. It will make you appreciate life. I appreciate Joey to come here and to talk to people that really don't know about it. I appreciate the family because at the same time, this is a situation that needs to be spread because you have other people that they worry about the wrong things. And when you have something like this and a whole lot of people really don't know, they tend to brush it off and worry about bills. When you have something, it's sicknesses, illnesses that really need to touch and learn about. So I just want to thank everyone here. It's kind of like I said, MC, whatever. Thank you.
So I want to call Hillary up to sort of end our program.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
With the expansion of the electronic medical record, is there a possibility that eventually, I hear the difficulty about the form that has to be completed and time consuming, is that something that pre-filled out as we expand our medical records so that we could already have that in there?
A part of it could be, yes. One of the longer forms that has to be done is the medical and behavioral history questionnaire, which truly the best person to fill that out is you, but things change. I know at LifeNet there are a couple of us who have filled it out and have it in our desks so that it's already ready, but it does have to be updated. But there is a lot that can be pulled from those medical records. Probably one of the best things, and I applaud the gentleman in the back for bringing this up. Talk about it now. Talk about it with your friends. Talk about it with your family. Tell them what you want. Make sure that your loved ones know your medical history. I sat down with my husband one night and said, do you know what surgeries I've had? I mean, do you really know what I've been through in my life? Because I've been married to him 25 years, but there were 20-some before that he wasn't part of. So the big thing is to talk now.
Thank you. Oh, one quick question?
Okay, one more.
Go for it.
I'm a kidney transplant coordinator here at VCU, and I was on call last week, and I've experienced everything that everyone said, okay? Just to sum it up, there were possibly 8 potential donors out there. I put several people on alert that we might be calling them in. I called in several people who we sent home, and we actually transplanted, I think it's 5 kidneys, a kidney pancreas, and at least 1 liver. So I thank our chaplains and LifeNet, and Joey, thank you for spreading the word, okay, because the word really needs to be spread. And we also do living donors, and actually a living donor case that took place last week, it was anonymous. The recipient had already sent a thank you card to the family, and it made a big difference. So I'm glad you got to meet one of your recipients. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that all of your questions have really set us up nicely for the next thing we want to talk about, and quickly, because I know I stand between you and lunch. I wanted to share this quote with you from UNOS, our good partners and members of Donate Life Virginia who are up the road. There was a recipient who is going to speak today, Patty Dean. She also works for LifeNet Health. And she has a saying she likes to say that scars are like tattoos, but with better stories. And I think there are many of you here who can attest to that today. So I think talking about where that story starts is important. And without the organ donor, there is no story and no hope and no transplant. I think we've talked about that today. to spread the word about signing up to be a donor. We've talked about the need. There are over 120,000 people across the country waiting right now. Joey's spoken to the fact that his mom saved or healed 66 lives. An average of 18 patients die every day waiting. So this need is urgent, and this need is great. And here's what we can do. 90% of adult Americans surveyed say they support organ, eye, and tissue donation. Right now, about 49% of adult Americans are registered to be organ, eye, and tissue donors. But if you ask someone to be able to explain the steps that you do, only about 30% say they confidently know how to do that. They're really simple. And all of you who are here today, who are healthcare providers, who are waiting for a transplant, who are recipients, you're all our Donate Life champions. And this is a great way for you to educate others on how they can sign up to be donors. You guys are probably pretty familiar with this. The first thing you do is you make the decision that that's what you want to do. And you can go online to donatelifevirginia.org to sign up. When you're trapped at the local DMV, though I love them, they're our wonderful, wonderful partners, you can say yes, check that box to be an organ, eye, and tissue donor. We have registration cards here if you're not signed up already. These are all ways that you can sign up to give hope and to save lives. To end today, I'd like to say thank yous. First, I'd like to thank our gracious hosts here at MCV. I'd like to thank Dr. Dow and Melissa Burton, who's been incredibly helpful for us. I'd like to thank our wonderful panel, Daryl, Alma, Debbie, and of course, Joey Gase. And I'd like to thank all of you. I'd like to thank sort of the donation and transplantation story in reverse today. If you'll join me, I'd like to ask some extraordinary people here to stand up so we can say thank you. Can everyone who is a recipient stand? And do we have anyone who's waiting? You guys can stay standing or sit, however you're comfortable. Is anyone here waiting? This woman in the back? This woman right here? We're working. I want to thank, can all of the folks who are healthcare providers here stand today? Or studying to be? I see some students. You can stand up. And do we have any donor families? Got Joey. There are other donor families here today? And we'd also like to recognize all of those who have already said yes to be an organ, eye, and tissue donor. So if you've got a heart on your license, if you've signed up online, please stand up. We want to say thank you because you're giving hope. You've made the Thank you so much. We'll be upstairs with your lunch. These are emails. If you have questions, there are box lunches, and Joey's going to stay with us for a little bit. If you want to come up and say hi or sign autographs, we'll be in room 104 upstairs. Thank you so much.